Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's SharePoint TV episode. Super excited to have you all here, and we actually have two amazing guests today. They're really funny, really passionate. I have a feeling that they're gonna get me in trouble this episode. Uh, Uh, but before we get started, just a bit of housekeeping. Remember, this is an interactive show. So if you have any questions, please ask them in the live chat, whether it's Microsoft 365 Dev, Project Cortex, how to cook bacon, anything Tesla's or SpaceX. We have an expert on the call on that. So don't hesitate to ask them. But before we get started, let's take a look at a quick video from our sponsor, Valo Intranet. Okay, let's get started. Let me start introducing today's guest. Our first guest is Mark Rackley. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing fantastic, and I'm just happy you introduced me before AC, so that was the highlight of my day.
Well, since uh, my name starts with a V, right? So usually it's in alphabetical order. I'm usually the last one of the group to ever get introduced. So I know that AC, he's kind of lucky. He's always the first. So just wanted to not make his head bigger directly at the start of the show.
Is that possible? I mean,
I don't know. I don't think it is. Uh, our second guest this week is Andrew Connell, commonly called AC. How are you doing, Andrew?
Was doing pretty good until I started going through Mark's intro, so I'm okay now.
we're just getting started.
We're just getting started. Fresh off Ignite, how did you guys find this year's conference for Microsoft 365 devs?
Mark, you want to go first?
I think that there's a lot of stuff for the devs to be excited about. So it's every year they talk about the things that they're adding and new things this year with like Project Cortex, the Fluid Framework, all the additions they're making to Microsoft Graph. I think there's just a lot of cool stuff there, and I'm looking forward to digging in more and seeing what it can actually do. Once we see how it's been advertised, but now I'm looking forward to see what it actually does.
I like how now that we have devs on the call, is like we've seen the marketing. Now we can't wait to actually be able to play with it and see what it actually does in real life.
Yeah, it's a lot. It was interesting. Some of the stuff that they shared last week was definitely interesting, or I guess it was 2 weeks ago now. It was interesting. It's there was definitely some dev stuff around Microsoft 365. Not too many surprises, I guess, because it just this cloud world, you kind of see stuff coming for a while ahead of time. But yeah, I mean, from the dev side, I'm really interested to see what they expose from Project Cortex. We don't really know just yet, but I'm really interested to see what people are going to expose. You're going to see a lot of big enterprises end up using that. So
let's talk a bit about Project Cortex. Maybe Mark or Andrew, I'm not sure if any of you had the chance to play with it with certain clients in the beta, but how do you explain Project Cortex to the normal Microsoft 365 users that sees Project Cortex all over the web? How does it actually help somebody in real life? What is the real use, at least from marketing stuff that we know, of Project Cortex?
So the way I would look at it is, I mean, it's Microsoft's new ECM offering when it comes to Microsoft 365. So first of all, anybody that's going to ask about, when do I get this on-prem? You're probably not. I mean, this is a cloud-based thing. and it's absolutely massive. So I think that what is different about like the main goal here with this is to use machine learning, use a lot of the artificial intelligence, a lot of the tech that we have access today that we didn't have before, to do a lot of the burdensome or the tedious type work when it comes to ECM based solutions. So in the past, with Microsoft or specifically with SharePoint, our ECM solution that really got a revamp, I think in around with SharePoint 2010, they did this idea of, let's do ECM to the masses. So instead of sending you to a record center or to a document management center, let's break up all those ECM features and let's put them everywhere where people do their work. But one of the challenges that you always have with that stuff is that in order to have a good ECM solution, to get data out of it and to be able to get visibility and to find out who's involved in what projects and what they do, the big thing that you really need is you need good information that a system can analyze over and can iterate over. And if you can't get good classified and quantified content into a system, it's going to be garbage in, garbage out. And what we tried to do in the past was doing different solutions, different forms, different UIs to get people to use managed metadata, to use content types, to be able to classify content. But it was always hard to get people to do that. Now, the thing that's the game changer to me with this, and I do, I have a second piece of this I want to share, kind of like my observation to it. But I think that the thing that's really interesting about this, yes, I know, Mark, I'll give you a chance to talk in a second. I came second, so you came first, so now I get to go. The thing that I find interesting about it is that now we're able to use technology we didn't have before to automatically classify and quantify the content with managed metadata, being able to also find the people that are involved in that content, using machine learning, using AI to be able to do a lot of that stuff that people didn't want to do on the front end, which is going to enable better solutions. So I think that to me is the big game changer this time around.
Well, you stole my answer, so I can't say anything now.
Sweet. So I'll continue.
So just a couple of the big features that I see Project Cortex, really being a game changer is they're adding the ability for you to upload unstructured documents, PDFs that haven't been OCR'd, even like images, and being able to use AI to extract the data to it, a customer name, an account number, and automatically adding those two fields in a SharePoint list so that you can train this solution to go through and be able to just take this image, extract metadata from it, and store it in the list. So that's fantastic. The other thing that I saw that was really cool was that it generates these wiki pages for you based upon all the content it's been gathering with the AI, so that if you've got a project that you've been working on with clients and customers and documents all over Office 365, it's going to generate a wiki page with information and the people associated with that project, the documents for that project, and you don't have to build that page. It's built for you automatically. But because it's in SharePoint, you still have the ability to edit that page and add web parts to it. There's a whole set of Cortex web parts that you can add to it as well. So it's going to be really cool to see it in practice. I'm looking forward to digging in.
One of the big things for me, I think it goes off what you were just saying, Mark, is I think that we've only seen like just a very small bit of it. I know that there's supposed to be content complete with this first kind of pass of what they showed at Ignite early in 2020, but I think that this is really just the start of a big journey. I mean, being able to have structure, being able to add structure and classification to content that is previously unstructured, that people previously did not add that kind of information to, is going to enable a lot of different scenarios and solutions. That's the part from a developer's point of view I'm really interested to see, because not only are they coming up with some cool stuff like what you talked about, Mark, with the topic pages, topic cards, and stuff like that, but the thing that I'm interested to see is that when they release the APIs, when they have APIs that allow us to have access to some of this content, I'm eager to see what other people come up with for like specific vertical solutions where a one size fits all isn't going to work. Microsoft's going to have some great ideas, but it's when you find like what customers are like going, yeah, but we need this scenario for this situation, and they build it, and that's where I think it's going to get interesting.
Well, I really hope they open up the APIs for us too. If they're doing all this work using the graph, if they expose those APIs to us, I mean that's a game changer for developers.
I think something that really important that you mentioned, since it will be hosted on SharePoint, and if, like you said, they open the APIs in Microsoft Graph, in theory at least, it should be really easy for partners to create content and to add value to it, kind of like we've been doing now with the SharePoint framework and other ways of customizing SharePoint.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm curious to see how much is going to be really on SharePoint. And SharePoint's going to be the UI to expose a lot of it and to get a lot of the information into it. But I wonder how much of it is going to be like split off separate into its own like little system. Where I think that like today, you know, they're in a private preview and you can get into it. I've got something like 20 or 30 customers are using it right now. I think it's fairly safe to assume that the reason we have a private preview is because this thing is huge and they've got to figure out what it's going to cost to run it, to host it, because this is a lot of processing, a lot of data that they're doing here. So I think I would probably bet that that's one of the reasons too why they're not sharing what the licensing is just yet, because they probably don't know what to charge for this, how much it's going to cost.
Yeah, that's a good point. We haven't heard anything about licensing yet about this. They have said that it's not yet announced, but we don't know yet if it will be included in something, if it will be a premium offering. They just said that it's to be determined, right?
I heard it's free, so I think we should start that rumor that it's free, and maybe if enough people say that, it'll actually gain traction, and then they're stuck, right?
Yeah, I think that goes right along with the Flat Earth Society. But I think
I would say be careful, because remember, Flow was also free at some point.
Oh God!
Or MS Power Automate, sorry, was also free at some point, and we saw how that turned out.
Yeah, I don't. So being completely serious here, I don't see how this is anything short of being only available in E5 licenses. But I would be surprised if this is not an add-on license on top of E5s. I mean, look at it this way. Today we have something called Graph Data Connect that allows us to extract all of our data from using the Microsoft Graph in a batch kind of form. But to do that, you have to have an add-on license called Workplace Analytics. This is so much more than that, and so I can't fathom that this is going to be just included out of the box. I mean, this is an enterprise level thing. I can't imagine that this won't cost at least an add-on license on top of E5.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was totally being facetious saying it's free. There's no way this will be free. It'll be an add-on of some sort. I just hope that they make it where it's not out of reach for SMBs. It'd be great if it was potential for them to have some access to it, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Awesome. Since we're talking about licensing, personal opinion from you guys. Do you prefer stuff to be introduced already at a high level pricing, or would you rather it be kind of like start off cheap and then in 2-3 years when it's enterprise ready, like say, I'm not saying it's not, but when it's more feature complete, then kind of change the prices to a higher subscription, like some other tools have recently done, let's say? Which one would you prefer from a client or as a personal preference?
As the customer or as the provider of the service?
Let's say as a customer.
As well, so my answer is kind of the same for both. I don't want to get into something and find out later that I've built something that's all of a sudden, with me doing nothing, it's going to start costing me a hell of a lot more. I think that for that, which I know that's kind of the boat that I don't know the exact details of everything around all the Power Platform stuff with Power Automate or Flow or Power Apps. I've intentionally stayed away from that, and it's primarily because they're on their third major licensing change in this calendar year, that I find that to be incredibly unreliable in terms of how do you build something and then and think it's going to cost X, and then have that dramatically change in a negative way for you, being more expensive down the road. To me, both as a customer and as somebody who's providing the service, I think you define the price for something. Here's how much you want to charge. And if no one buys it, it's because they don't see the value that price delivers. And so I would rather build value to meet the price that I want to charge for it and see features come instead of having to build the features and then say, okay, now that you're on this, I don't know. I was going to say it feels more like a drug deal when it's kind of like going, hey, first it's free, and then we're going to start charging you more and more and more.
Well, so I see their point of view. They've got to make money on this stuff so they can keep investing in it and adding more functionality to it. So the things that they made premium, like the HTTP connector and stuff, I can see why they made that premium, right? Because it opens up the world to where you don't need to pay for any of the premium connectors if you're using that. Mm. So from a business standpoint, where they've said we've got to figure out, the right way to license this, I can understand the decision they made. But again, as a consumer, I don't want to build something that's free and then all of a sudden now it's not free anymore. So hopefully they're learning a lesson here with the licensing, what happened here, and that it doesn't hit so hard in the future. But I do understand Microsoft's reasoning for it, and I understand the consumers, maybe not enjoying the decision that was made.
For it.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Project Cortex, we've talked a bit about it. Can't wait to see it live. Now let's switch topics a bit. And Andrew, I think I know, but Mark, do you have any Microsoft certifications? Did you ever do any?
I did in the past, but it's not something that I currently pursue. Since I'm more in the management space, being a partner at my company, I tend to stay out of the trenches when it comes to a lot of development. I know AC probably does a little more development than I do. So I know enough to be dangerous when it comes to being, what should be done and how you should do it. I can, tell you the right ways to do it, but I'm lucky enough to have a team of developers that I can tell them, I know what you need to do. You guys go develop it.
Okay, so just for the record, so you mean lately all you've been doing is PowerPoints and out-of-the-box stuff, not real code?
I didn't say that. I didn't. I'm just saying that the certifications, it's not in a path. It's not in my career path to be up to date on the certifications.
Okay,
that makes sense.
How about you, AC? Have you done any certifications recently?
Recently, no. Long time ago, yes. So I've been involved with one. Well, I guess the reason why I haven't done any the reason why I haven't done any recently is because I've been involved in helping create the one that got announced at Ignite, which meant I couldn't go take it right when it came out because it wouldn't be legitimate for me at least. But yeah, it's been interesting watching over the last few years, watching customers request from Microsoft some way to be able to measure or to kind of have like that what is it, like the minimum bar, and saying I need something that says that this person is a certified Microsoft 365 developer. And it's nice to see that we do have that. We will have that. I guess we kind of have that now, and it's going to be improved and refined over time. But that was the big announcement as far as certifications go at Ignite, where we have a new Microsoft 365 certified developer, and I can go into a lot of depth on that thing if you want to learn more about that.
So I didn't mean this to be a plug, but is Voitanos going to have a workshop that will help specifically someone getting their certification for that, or is that in your roadmap?
Appreciate you asking that, but let's just say it makes a lot of sense, but it's too early for me to be able to say that with my involvement in the cert right now.
Okay, all right. Well, let me know when Bergen can take the workshop.
But so it's really funny how we went from SharePoint certifications, because SharePoint Dev was really the only, let's say, collaboration certification we could get, and now it's Microsoft 365. What is a Microsoft 365 developer? Do you guys think we still have people that only dev for SharePoint, or as a dev today, you need to know all of the Microsoft stack?
It's a good question. So before I answer that, there's one thing I call out here is framework dev. So let's come back. I'd love to answer that question, but when we talk about SharePoint Framework, so we will come back to you. So one thing so Vlad, your question about, is there such thing as a SharePoint developer? Is there such thing as a graph developer? Is there such thing as like an Azure developer? And I don't think you can say that I don't think it's really fair or really wise for anybody to try and focus on one thing too much, because everything is so intertwined these days that it's not as easy to have just like these separate stacks, where before it was I had a ASP.NET website that used a SQL database, and that was basically it. And I don't think that you can really set that. So I think what makes more sense now is focusing on like what problem you're trying to solve. So Microsoft 365, you're in SharePoint Online, right? You need to learn some stuff about SharePoint for SharePoint development, but you're also going to probably be getting data from other systems too. So you're going to be using Graph, and to do that, you're going to be, or Microsoft Graph, and to do that, you have to authenticate. So you're going to have to authenticate from using Azure AD. So you have to understand working with Azure AD, and you got to understand working with maybe storage things inside of Azure as well. So anybody that says that, I only do this, I'm not saying that's not true, but I really think that is really starting to, that audience is really starting to narrow down. You don't have just a SharePoint developer. At least that's not the kind of person that if I was a company that I'd be looking to hire to work with us. Because I mean, Mark, you probably at your company, you probably aren't looking for a SharePoint developer. You're looking for, I would presume that you guys are looking more for, I want a web developer who's familiar with M365 and Azure.
No, absolutely. I mean, and as they keep adding more functionality to the graph, as you start looking at things like Azure Functions, it's just such a big world from a developer point of view. So there's not really, if you're just a SharePoint developer, your value to organizations is greatly diminished. So look at the bigger picture, look at all the pieces involved, and learn how to use all the tools out of the box. Because as a developer, these days, if you're a developer, your first thought should not be, how do I write code for this? It should be, what's already there that I can use.
Yep. I totally agree with that.
And do you guys think Microsoft is making it easier for a dev to kind of switch to use one technology, one framework for more than just SharePoint? Or is it still separate, where if you want to do SharePoint something, if you want to do Teams, you got to go do something else? It's like a completely different framework? Or Microsoft?
That sounds like a very leading question, I think, Vlad.
You think?
So,
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, you go with this one.
Okay, I'll make a short statement, then I'll let AC kind of ramble on about it. I kid. So with the SharePoint framework, you actually have the ability to create Office add-ins, Teams applications, and SharePoint applications. So this framework
what I think that we're starting to see, today we have this thing called the SharePoint Framework, and that is the preferred way of extending and customizing the SharePoint experience. At the same time, we've also seen things like, Microsoft Teams has their own extensibility model, their own API. We've also seen Office add-ins do the exact same thing. But one thing that we've seen that's very common between both Microsoft Teams and Office add-ins is that when you extend these things, it really boils down to two core things. One is a web app that is hosted somewhere. It doesn't matter where it is, but it's got to be hosted somewhere. So whether it's a task pane inside of Outlook or Word, whether it is a custom tab inside of Microsoft Teams, it's still just a web page somewhere. Now, the other thing that both of those platforms give us is a client-side API to be able to talk from that web page to the hosting client, be it Outlook, be it Teams, be it Word, be it Excel. And they have their own APIs, their own ways of doing things. But when you're inside of Microsoft 365, when you're inside of SharePoint Online and Office 365, it's nice to be able to use just one development framework that already has a lot of stuff baked in that you can leverage in different places. And that's what Mark was talking about, where with the SharePoint framework, it's turning into being more of a Microsoft 365 development framework and those components are hosted in SharePoint. SharePoint's like your web host. And then you can, depending on what you want to do, those same things that you build a web part. And today, you know, in production, we can have a custom channel tab in Teams or a custom personal tab in Teams. And in dev preview today, we can, or dev preview tomorrow, I guess, and like, or in the next, I don't mean tomorrow as in like, you know, free beer tomorrow. I mean like literally like in the next few days, next week or so. The next version of the SharePoint framework will support doing custom task panes in Outlook as a dev preview, and then we'll see that same thing coming with other ones. So it's really quickly becoming, you know, not just the SharePoint framework, but it's becoming more of like the Microsoft 365 development framework.
Awesome. Before we move on from SharePoint Framework, there's the question in the chat, AC, that you said you're going to take. And I've seen that on Twitter quite a lot. I'm not a dev, as you all know. I only do PowerShell, which AC says it's not real dev. So I'll let AC take this one. How many things do you have to install today? And how many, I see people complain about all of the files that you get when you try to do SharePoint Framework dev.
Yeah, I see the same thing too. So I'll cut to the chase. I'll explain what's going on, and then so this is to B Harath 108. This is to your question. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but you gotta love usernames or in a chat or something and not real names. I guess Vlad, you got your name. Look at that. So when we did like .NET based SharePoint development in the past, you installed Visual Studio, which was like this magical app that you downloaded 1 gig, yet it installed like 30 gigs of stuff. And it basically gave you everything in the kitchen sink at install time. What the SharePoint team did is they chose to follow the model for the new SharePoint framework. They chose to follow the same web dev model that the rest of the web is really doing. And that is, we leverage Node as the runtime, and you install the bare minimum of what you need to get running, and then each project has everything it needs inside of it. That's a little bit different from how we do stuff with .NET, whereas .NET says, I'm going to go get everything in the kitchen sink. You have to install that on the server, and then you can assume that it's there when you deploy your app. One is not better than the other. It's just two different approaches. We even seen .NET Core has kind of taken the approach of what Node has done as well, where you don't have like the kitchen sink on everything. You just kind of get stuff as you need it. So to answer your question though, Vlad, how many things do you have to install to start doing SharePoint Framework development? I think I just counted it up. You need a total of 4 things. You have to install Node, which is like the equivalent of .NET Framework. You have to install the SharePoint Framework generator, which is just an NPM package, a Node package. Yeoman, which is going to use the generator, that again, just an NPM package, and a tool called Gulp, which is like the equivalent of MS Build on .NET. Once you install those 4 things, which you can do, if you have a broadband connection, you can, I do this in sessions at a conference, I can take a brand new laptop and have it up and running with the SharePoint framework in about 2 or 3 minutes, even on conference Wi-Fi, right? It goes pretty darn fast. So the question in the chat was, is there a DMG or a single EXE that you could use to install this? The answer is no, and you don't really want that. But there is a doc, and I'll grab it when I stop talking in a second. I'll put it in the chat. But there is a doc on the SharePoint docs that you can go through and that you can hold on one sec. That you can follow in the docs to actually walk you through everything you need to install. I mean, I have a free like little email course that walks people through this as well, that shows how to go about doing that. That try and simplify the dev platform. It's really not that hard. It's a bit of who moved my cheese, but the tools are all the exact same thing as what we used before. It's just new names for stuff.
And if I can add on to that one last comment, when I first started doing SPFX development, I had the exact same reaction. I'm sure AC can remember me complaining about it. Why is it downloading all this stuff? Why is this garbage on my computer for every single project? Yeah, it's a change. Things are different. So at some point you do have to just accept the world we live in and go with it. Just kind of accept it and move on. It doesn't bother me now because I've just accepted it. This is the way the new world is.
I was going to say, I think AC only remembers the last 3 things you complain about. This has been thrown off the memory.
I don't complain that much. Just on weekdays. I only complain on weekdays.
Oh, okay. And kind of like a shameless plug, but I think AC at the SharePoint conference in May, you have a full workshop on the SharePoint framework, right? They are going to cover for people how to get started and how to do stuff for M365.
Yeah, I am. Actually, I'm doing 2 workshops. I believe I'm doing 2 workshops at the SharePoint conference in May. So the first one I'm doing is I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's on the first day of the workshops. And it's something like mastering the SharePoint framework or using the SharePoint framework to extend your SharePoint experience, something like that. And I forget because I changed the name of it at some point in the last year, and I keep forgetting which one I'm using. But the idea is that workshop is for people who are brand new to the SharePoint framework. It is, if you are a web developer with no SharePoint experience, you're in good shape. It's just the idea here is to get, there we go. So the name of the session is Developers Learn How to Use the SharePoint Framework to Customize and Extend SharePoint. Thank you. That's
in all caps.
Yeah, so in all caps. I was screaming it.
Balmer style, developers.
Yeah. I've done a similar, I do an older version of this workshop. I do it very frequently. I've done it at the last 2 SPCs, and it's really well attended. I think it was sold out either both or one of the last 2 years. But we start from the ground up, and we're going to get your machine up and running and all that stuff. Now, it's not designed to be a workshop that is kind of like, hands-on. We do it during the session, and the reason why is just because conference Wi-Fi, it doesn't work. And but everything we do during the workshop, you get it, and so you can take it back to your environment, take it back to your work, and duplicate everything. So that's one of the workshops I'm doing, and I think I'm doing another workshop as well that takes it to the next level to go like, well, how do I do like automated testing and continuous deployment and continuous integration, performance? How do I do all that stuff with SharePoint Framework? And that's going to be, I believe, on the second day. Two like pre-workshop days, and I'm doing both of those.
Awesome.
Yep.
Well, since AC has talked a lot in the first half hour, let's check something with Mark. Another big topic at Ignite was the Fluid Framework. And I've heard rumors that you have a few feelings about it. But before you tell your feelings, can you explain what is the Fluid Framework? Like, we see like people chatting at the same time and the chat showing in 4 different systems at once in 5 different languages. But what is, for the average users and developer, what is or what should be the Fluid Framework?
So gosh, that's not a simple question, right? The Fluid Framework.
I never said I was going to make it easy. I said that I'm going to let you talk and let AC shut up a bit.
Well, yeah, okay, but AC will tell me where I'm wrong here, so this is why I like AC. The Fluid Framework, think about it as rapid, real-time collaboration across all of your Office 365 footprint. You can create an application using the SharePoint framework that uses the Fluid Framework. This could be something for sharing data, could be text, it could be any application you want to build. And you can deploy this application you can add it to an email, you can add it to a SharePoint page, you can add it to a Word document, you can add it to PowerPoint, so you can add to all these surfaces, but it's a living document now, whether that's an email, whether it's a Word document, whether it's a web page, they're living. So anybody makes a change to any of those, everybody sees the changes. So maybe you have a spreadsheet that you're keeping numbers up to date, and now everybody can work on that and collaborate together. Think of co-authoring on steroids across everything in Office 365. And that's kind of the experience with the Fluid Framework. So I was actually at the dev kitchen for it, so I played with it a little bit. It's really intriguing. I'm interested to see what some real-world use case scenarios are for it, because I'm just interested to see what people actually do with it in the real world. I can see, my critical hat. I'm going to put my critical hat on for just a second. I think it's a great tool, but my concern is that someone's going to create a SharePoint Framework web part, and they're going to put that in an email, and that CEO is going to see that email, and he's going to read it, and then everyone's going to make a ton of changes. And so now there's multiple versions of a truth depending on when you looked at the email. And I'm afraid that's going to cause some concern. So I think that there will be, if you're going to look at using the Fluid Framework, I think you need to be careful about who your audience is and how it's going to be used.
Okay, I heard a lot of people at the conference, a lot of like records management type vendors, archive, compliance vendors and stuff who, I mean, when they saw that, they immediately were like, emails are supposed to be immutable. And I had that same reaction too, Mark. I'm like, wait a minute, is this the demo that we should be showing here? That kind of scares me a bit.
Okay, so. But let's say that today, a lot of the times when you send an email, you add an attachment. Nowadays, it asks you, do you want to link it to OneDrive for Business? And it automatically uploads it, sets the permissions, and adds it as a share. Wouldn't that have the same concern in a way that the file you look at might be different?
You still see those things as external links.
Okay.
The thing that you don't see with those things is when I look at an email inside of Outlook, this is what Mark was saying. When I look at an email inside of Outlook, I expect everything I see in that email to be immutable. If all of a sudden I look at it now and I come back to it 20 minutes later and it's different, or I see it changing in front of my eyes, I'm kind of getting a weird feeling about this, right? That doesn't seem right to me. I think that's going to scare some people. So I think that Microsoft knows that. They've heard the feedback. So I'm curious to see how they at least make that aware to certain people.
Okay, I did not see that like that. And I think the new Yammer, the new UI they just announced, is kind of built using that framework to facilitate that integration with, I think we've seen Outlook in Yammer in email and things like that, right?
I think, yeah. Did you spend much time looking at the Yammer stuff last week or 2 weeks ago, Mark?
No, I didn't, honestly. So I can't speak to that for sure. But I did see some of the demos where they did like embed a Yammer conversation in an email. So there's just, I mean, it'll be cool to let's wait and see what happens. The great thing about Microsoft is that when they're giving us a lot of cool stuff, and when we have feedback, they will listen to the feedback and they'll adjust accordingly. So I'm not saying avoid this in any way whatsoever. Definitely look at it, and there's some cool things. I've seen some cool demos where the translation demo, I think we all saw, they showed it at Build, where you could theoretically have a SharePoint page with one of these web parts, and you could, fill out the content and then automatically translate it to other pages. So there is some cool things you can do with it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it demos well. I guess the part that is going to be interesting to me with that whole fluid stuff is like, I'm waiting to see some real examples. The demos are great, but all the demos are toys and games. I'm waiting to really see some real stuff here instead of just like somebody throwing it together and just showing, hey, look, this demo's well. It's like, yeah, but let's actually see it. So I'm not, dismissing it, but kind of need to see more.
You're waiting to see it actually alive and in prod, kind of.
Well, it feels like Sway. It's kind of like I saw Sway and like going, right? Well, I mean, and that may not be fair, but that was like when I saw Sway, I'm like, I don't really get the use of it. You can make all these pretty things. I'm like, yeah, that looks like something that should be coming from Adobe. It doesn't seem like this is a Microsoft thing to me. And then sure enough, it goes away. So now I'm looking at Fluid Framework and I'm like, I see why you guys need it, but I'm not really sure for your collaborative authoring and stuff between like Word and Excel and all that. But beyond that, I'm like, jury's out.
Do you want to discourage? They created a cool tool that they needed for functionality. Do you really want to discourage them from letting us use it as well?
No.
I thank you for letting us use it. Right? I mean, I don't want to discourage that behavior. I like that behavior.
Okay, great. I like the way you challenged that. So here's that exact response. Here's what I told the guy, the team that owns it. So I sat in the Fluid Framework session. I listened to what they said, and I happened to be sitting with some people that we know that are with the engineers and stuff related to SharePoint, the guy and the team that owns it. And they kind of looked over at me and they're like, so what do you think? And I'm like, I'm on the spot here. And I guess my reaction was, I get why you guys need it. And I think it's cool that it's like going, hey, we had to build it. So if you guys want to use it, you can use it too. And if that's the case, like what you just said, Mark, cool, I get it. But the part that I'm really not getting here is that I feel like you guys are talking about this thing like a mountain when it just feels like it's a little like a bump. And I'm being sold this big thing. At least that's the way it's coming across, and I just don't see it yet. And maybe it's too early, but
I think you lack vision. Maybe you just lack vision. That's what it is.
Say again.
You like vision. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, I just like to see a little more tangible.
Let's see something. But I do see a question here in the chat.
I was going to ask you about it. Talk about stuff that's tangible, since you're Mr. Forms and InfoPat and stuff like that. I love you too, Mark.
This. Yeah.
How should somebody differentiate when to use SharePoint Framework or Power Apps? When does one make more sense than the other?
I mean, we could spend an hour on that question alone. Yeah, that's a very broad question, and we could probably spend an entire hour talking about different scenarios. The answer, it's the SharePoint answer. It depends. It depends on what your skill set is. It depends on the content you're trying to access. It depends on what are the use cases for the form, how much custom business logic do you need, where do you need to deploy it to, in what environments. So it really depends on the exact scenario. I can't really think of something that might, that there's not going to be a clear-cut answer in many cases. I say kind of what we take in our organization when we're presented with an application that requires forms, we say, can this be done in Power Apps? Can we use what's there before cracking open code and writing code? So maybe that's a good differentiator. If you can do it in Power Apps, look at doing it in Power Apps. Otherwise, go into the SharePoint framework. I don't know if AC has any thoughts on that.
Nothing different. I mean, I would have said the exact same thing. To me, it boils down to, number one, what are you most comfortable with? Right? For me, I'm more comfortable doing SharePoint Framework. So I'm going to go to SharePoint Framework also because I have no extra licensing costs associated with it. That's not to say that the licensing cost is a bad thing, because you're getting a WYSIWYG kind of tool to build an app. But if I talk to someone else, they say, well, I can knock this out really quick in a Power App. Well, there's no code to support with that Power App. Where with mine, if I'm building it, somebody's got to support the code. I mean, because maybe a new version comes out and that's going to affect it. Of course, you can run the same thing with Power Apps, but it's something you have to consider. And it really, I mean, a lot of times you have to look at it and just say, can I do the same thing with the SharePoint framework that I can do in Power Apps? Yeah, you can. Can I do it faster? I don't know. It depends on what you're trying to do, but licensing comes into it, and maintenance comes into it. It's a lot of just what you're most comfortable with. I think that's what it really boils down to. I thought your answer was spot on, Mark.
Okay, and I guess I should point out that we talk about the licensing concerns, but as long as you stay in SharePoint, you're not going to experience those licensing costs because.
Oh, really?
Well, yeah, Power Apps.
As long as you only connect to SharePoint.
If you're only connecting to SharePoint and SharePoint content and working within SharePoint, you don't need to worry about the licensing changes. It's only if you're going outside of it to like Azure SQL, making HTTP calls and that sort of thing.
So I'll flip it on both you guys then. How often do you see that being the case versus being the case of building a Power App that reaches to other sources? And I'm being genuine here because I don't do that, and so I don't know. I'm curious. I'm asking the question. I just didn't want to type it in the chat.
No, so when you're designing the application, that now becomes a consideration. So when a customer comes to us and says, I need this, I want you to create a Power App for me, or I need you to create an application, well, we now need to think, can SharePoint be a good source for data for this Power App, or does it need to be Azure SQL? Well, if it's going to be Azure SQL, there's going to be an additional cost. So we do have to take those things into consideration, where before the licensing changes, we might say, well, let's just do Azure SQL. It's a true relational database. Let's take advantage of the power that's there. So it does change the way you pitch solutions to the customer and where the data is going to be stored.
Cool. That's fair.
And I think it's the same thing for Power Automate. As long as all of your data is in Office 365, not Microsoft, really Office 365, you don't pay anything extra. Right, Mark?
Correct. So if you're just connecting to SharePoint sites and lists and we're maybe looking at emails and that sort of thing, and in a flow that you create in Power Automate, you don't need to be concerned with those extra licenses at that point.
Okay, awesome. And now let's talk a bit on something that is subject. I'm not sure if I want to give credit to Givens, for it, but Chris Givens is in the chat. Kind of Microsoft Search. It's something that got announced quite a while ago, so it's, I think, over 1 year old, so it's not really new. But we now have the Microsoft Graph Search endpoint. We're going to start seeing external connectors into Microsoft Search. How do you guys see that? Do you think we're going to see a lot of search-based solutions come in kind of common at clients, or you think it's still going to be like only niche needs?
We create search-based solutions all the time. So this just adds, another tool in our toolbox. So I think it's great. I think the other search things they announced around SharePoint is fantastic with the search verticals they introduced, as well as to be able to finally customize the search results. So I'm excited about all the search stuff and digging into it.
I'm not as familiar with these search connectors that they've introduced with Graph. I don't know, it was kind of hard to stay on top of everything that comes out of Ignite. But the thing that I got out of it that I thought was really interesting, I talked to somebody on the search team about this on my podcast that week, and I think that the part that's really interesting that what they've done is around the extensibility for custom search results, what Mark just alluded to. And like he said, I mean, a lot of people are using search as the database or the engine behind the scenes for their application because it's so fast, because it's already got access to all the content. It really does make things a lot easier. The thing that I didn't realize that when it was Mikhail Svensson, who is now on the search team at Microsoft. One of the things he said that I didn't realize is that we had all these customization options for us in the classic mode of SharePoint, but when Modern came out, we lost all that. We didn't have those customization offerings, and so many of us were stuck from moving from classic over to Modern because those things weren't there. And so there's a lot of customers that are still stuck on classic simply because of not being able to create a custom search experience. These things are going to remove a huge blocker for those people. And I mean, that's a big deal. Death to classic as far as I'm concerned. We've got to rip off the Band-Aid and get to Modern as fast as we can, or at least as soon as we can. Fast is definitely not happening apparently. But I think that, having that is a big deal.
I never thought I'd say this, but I completely agree with everything that AC just said.
Wow, I hope this is being recorded. You can cut that part. And talking about customizations, I think before that, there was a PNP Web part that was published out there, free to use, that a lot of organizations were using to actually do this. But now it's going to be there out of the box.
Yeah, and that's the guy that wrote that web part is Mikhail Svensson. He's the guy. He was a part of the PNP team, SharePoint MVP, and then got hired by Microsoft. And so he's doing not only is he
dark side.
Well, yeah. Not only is he doing a really good job of pushing this story in the search customizations, but he's pushing a really good story for being an advocate of making the solutions that Microsoft publishes open. How they're doing it in case we need to customize stuff, making it very transparent and customizable, and being able to leverage as much stuff from the community as possible, so that if Microsoft doesn't go all the way to the goal line on some of these search customizations, we can see how they're doing stuff, so the community can kind of do that +1 to get us over the goal line. And I think that we haven't seen that, at least in the Office group, ever. To see somebody doing that and being that advocate, and people are listening to him, and he's actually making waves with this. I think that's a really big differentiator.
Yeah, agreed.
Awesome. We have about 9 minutes left, so let's talk about something else that's been really popular at least in the community, is bots. Lots of people are really passionate about them, on putting bots everywhere. A lot of people don't really see the value yet. I think, Mark, you have a workshop on how to get started with bots at SPC, right?
Yeah. So last year I did a post-con about getting started using bots, and then they liked it so much they brought it back. So I'll be again doing my workshop on a post-con, and it's really a workshop on like I said, just getting started with bots. In fact, the first half day of the workshop, we're not even writing code. We're using some of the out-of-the-box features, getting people familiar with things like Lewis and all the other tools in Azure's cognitive services that make bots possible. So my hope is that you can come into that workshop not knowing anything about bots. By the first half of the day, feel comfortable enough to go and create your own no-code bot, or by the end of the workshop, get started creating things with the bot framework and creating more complicated, in-depth bots. So it's a busy day, but hopefully a good day.
Have you ever seen any, like say, 2-3 clients request the same bot? Is it something that you're starting to see the same request, or every client is just different?
No, we're starting to see, well, they're just now starting to get to dip their toes in bots. So one of the things that we're seeing are people taking the concept of the Q&A maker bot that you can go look at now at qnamaker.ai, and I cover that in the workshop. But basically taking the same concept of creating a Q&A bot, but adding steroids to it to make it a little more powerful, add some more features to it. But the concept of a user being able to ask a bot about their benefits or vacation policy instead of having to go to an FAQ or having to search for it and get the right search result back. We're finding those quick answers are people are interested in bots to get started with that.
Okay, is there do you see most of the box being that the user has to ask stuff, or do we start to see more proactive, I don't know how to call them, but proactive box, kind of like when I get the email from Cortana every morning, heads up, here's the stuff you promised to people that you're going to do, but you haven't marked as done. Do you start to see a lot of stuff like that, or is it still Q&A style?
We're not seeing...
What?
You saying my wife is now a bot?
Oh,
this is something we're supposed to do.
No, we're definitely seeing more of the former. We're not seeing a lot of the bots part of the conversations, especially because when you have the bots in teams, that's where a lot of people are starting to use these bots. So it involves a lot of the users initiating the conversations.
Okay, and maybe if you can jump on this, do you see those deployed mostly in SharePoint as kind of an extension, or is everything going in Teams for bots now, since that's where a lot of the chat-based stuff is?
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of things on like the internet homepages, like with the bots you see today, the little at the bottom right of a lot of pages where you can pop up and do a bot. But Teams is really where they're growing because you're already in conversations there anyway. So just adding the bot to it makes sense.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I agree with Mark on that one. I think it's a better. I think I've said I agree with Mark multiple times. He's only said that he totally agrees with me one time today, so I just want to call that out. But
I agree with that too, so I've agreed with you twice.
Oh, I see. Oh. My failure is that I can't convince you that you're wrong, but that's okay. For everybody that's watching this, Mark and I are very good friends. We like to just like punch at each other and just have fun with this stuff. So, but yeah, I agree with Mark on that. I mean, I think those concepts of like the bots that open up in the bottom right hand corner of the browser, and then they start like pinging right away and like trying to talk to you and stuff. I think the most common action with that is people hitting close. And it's more annoying, and it's rather where we see when you want to do that from a web experience, it's more like the little like the universal icon for like a feedback that shows up in the corner. When you click on that, then that starts like a bot conversation. But yeah, the more natural place for that stuff to be is over in more of a conversational experience, be that in like a chat, like in Teams, or like like in Skype or something like that. I think it just makes more sense in those places. And we see that across, not just in Microsoft, we see that across every platform. You see that in Slack, you see that in all these other platforms as well. So
Slack has a bot now?
Oh, Slack's had it before Teams. Slack's had integration with that kind of stuff. But yeah, you can do like, I think it's GitHub. GitHub uses Slack for all like deployment of code. So when you want to do any kind of deployment to production, there's a chat bot that you interact with inside of Slack. And it walks you through stuff, getting your deployment in the queue and all that. It's a really cool approach too, because it allows you if this interests anybody, there's a blog post on the Slack engineering blog from about 2 years ago that explains this. But it's pretty neat because you hire somebody new to the team, and you show them, well, how do I do deployment to production? It's like, jump in this channel and watch how everybody else does it. And you just jump in, you watch it, and then all of a sudden they get permissions where they can do it, and they start doing the same conversations.
Are you promoting Slack?
What's that?
Are you promoting Slack?
I mean, it's just the communication vehicle that you can use. I mean, Slack teams, they're as far as conversations go, they're the exact same with a different UI, right? Teams is so much more than Slack. That's why I find this whole like thing where Microsoft likes to call out how much Teams is growing over Slack is funny, because they're not the same tool. They have one thing that they overlap on, and that's about it. But
I can agree with that.
Teams reached 20 million daily users.
Yeah.
Actually, yesterday there was.
I haven't opened Slack in a year, so I don't use Slack anymore at all.
I use it every day.
I use it because there's a lot of. I'm a consultant. I, like you guys, some clients use Slack, some companies I work with. So you have no choice at the end of the day. And I think we're seeing a lot of that where users are starting to get used to work with multiple platforms. It's not like before where they needed months of training to start working with SharePoint. It's like, oh, you're using Teams. Okay, this is how it works. You're using Slack. This is how it works. Like you said, chat is the main thing that they're both the same on, but Teams has all of the integrations with Office 365, which makes it really awesome.
Yeah, I know. I mean, all this, I agree with what you just said there, Vlad. And I think that, I mean, all this stuff about people saying that, oh, Slack's going to get killed and Slack's going to go away and stuff like that. I mean, right, and email was going to die when Yammer came around. And I don't buy it. I mean, I don't buy it.
Okay, one last question. I see it's 59, so we have 1 minute left. And I'm not sure which one of you knows more about this, but what is the future of adaptive cards?
I'm not sure I understand the question, Todd, but they're there. Use them. I haven't heard of anything to indicate that there's something coming on. There may be stuff coming with them that I don't know about, but I don't know if AC has any insights there.
I mean, I love the concept of them. I just would like to see more places adopt them, more places use them. I mean, today, and I know this isn't terribly fair, but it's pretty much the truth. Adaptive cards is a Microsoft technology. The world is not all Microsoft. I live in a world where I work with organizations that are, I mean, every time I talk to them, it's like we're in Google Docs and we're in Google Drive or we're in Dropbox.
Heresy.
I know, but I mean, it's just funny that in this SharePoint world, so many people think that it's just a Microsoft-centric world. And I mean, it is in some organizations, but that's not the real world. And I rarely see organizations other than ones that end with an @Microsoft.com email address that are just inside of one platform like that. And so I'd like to see, like, Slack adopt adaptive cards being a better approach there. I'd like to see them better adopted on mobile platforms. I'd like to see them better work inside of browsers for forms and stuff. So, I mean, they're great inside of Microsoft tech, but I don't really think we need new functionality with adaptive cards. I just need to see them adopted more. That's my opinion on it.
Valid point.
Wow, Mark, he didn't say he agreed.
I didn't say agreed. I said it was a valid point.
It's close enough. We'll take it as a third agreeing for the day. Well, thank you guys very much for taking the time to chat with us today. Before we announce the guest for the next show and the date, let's take a look at a quick video, I think, by AC talking about SharePoint Conference 2020.
I'm Andrew Connell. I'm a SharePoint developer and a Microsoft MVP, focuses on the SharePoint Framework. What makes SharePoint Conference so special is that you've got people from not just the community, but also from Microsoft, and a really good diverse group of attendees that are attending the conference. You can show up and get your question answered. If the person you're talking to doesn't know the answer, they generally know somebody else that's at the conference that you can refer them to. There's something there for everybody. If you are trying to get a business problem solved and you're not really sure where to go, it's a great one-stop shop for you to go to get all your questions answered. I always find one of the biggest values is going to be the opportunity to be able to talk to the speakers, to ask questions, but then also the hallway track. It's never on a conference schedule, but that really is where there's a lot of value to be able to connect with other people who are at the conference, finding people who are doing the same thing you're doing. One of the neatest things for me about speaking at a conference is really the time right after your session. I love walking out in the hallway and having a group of about 5 to 10 people that are standing around, and you end up getting like this dialogue going on for a while. Seeing the dialogue going on not between the attendee and the speaker like myself, but having it between 2 different attendees as well. Come with a specific set of questions and reach out to some of those speakers. You've got all their contact information. Everyone's on social media between Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. Reach out to them and try and start the conversation on different things.
Welcome back. So let's talk a bit about the next show. This week we had 2 developers on, so people that break stuff. We're actually going to take a quick break because of Thanksgiving and some of the other holidays going on. So our next show is going to be on December 11th, and we're actually going to switch from dev to IT pro. So we're going to have Todd Clint, Shane Young. You guys don't see AC on camera, but he's making a funny face. But we're going to switch a bit more about IT Pro. I know Shane is doing a lot of Power Platform recently, but he's still an IT Pro in his heart. I'm pretty sure of it. So really talk about what's been coming into that management side. And remember, you can follow SharePoint TV. At the top right of your screen, just click the follow button, should be in purple, and make sure to tell your friends to join us. Those will also be recorded, but it's always more fun when you join us live and you can ask questions. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining, and see you on December 11th.
I'm Andrew Connell. I'm a SharePoint developer and a Microsoft MVP, focuses on the SharePoint Framework. What makes SharePoint Conference so special is that you've got people from not just the community, but also from Microsoft, and a really good diverse group of attendees that are attending the conference. You can show up and get your question answered. If the person you're talking to doesn't know the answer, they generally know somebody else that's at the conference that you can refer them to. There's something there for everybody. If you are trying to get a business problem solved and you're not really sure where to go, it's a great one-stop shop for you to go to get all your questions answered. I always find one of the biggest values is going to be the opportunity to be able to talk to the speakers, to ask questions, but then also the hallway track. It's never on a conference schedule, but that really is where there's a lot of value to be able to connect with other people who are at the conference, finding people who are doing the same thing you're doing. One of the neatest things for me about speaking at a conference is really the time right after your session. I love walking out in the hallway and having a group of about 5 to 10 people that are standing around, and you end up getting like this dialogue going on for a while. Seeing the dialogue going on not between the attendee and the speaker like myself, but having it between 2 different attendees as well. Come with a specific set of questions and reach out to some of those speakers. You've got all their contact information. Everyone's on social media between Twitter or LinkedIn or Facebook. Reach out to them and try and start the conversation on different things.